Multiculturalism. You've seen the movie, you've played the board game. Well, now French President Sarkozy is fighting a very tough election. So, of course, he's spoken out against the failings of the policy, the concept of multiculturalism. Well, has it failed? Not only in France, but internationally. Author and columnist Douglas Murray is Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society in London. He's brilliant, so he will know the answer. Welcome to you. Has it failed?
Well, yes, but President Sarkozy has rather muddied the waters in the debate because, first of all, he talked just the other day about, he said, too many foreigners being in France. That's exactly the sort of thing that the multiculturalism debate is trying not to be about and should not be about. Multiculturalism is a state policy that teaches not that that you should lead lives together in a country, but you should lead separate lives, and that government should encourage you to lead separate lives. So actually, what's happening here is President Sarkozy has sort of mixed a whole set of things in, and I don't think that helps the debate, really.
Yes. Yes, it's acutely political, and he's a panicking, drowning man in some ways. Because those of us who have reservations about official multiculturalism, that's not a comment on immigration as such, really, is it?
No, absolutely. I mean, you could have immigration going on for years without having any discussion of multiculturalism. Most people, when they hear multiculturalism, even now, tend to think you mean multiracialism, different people, different coloured skins, different coloured backgrounds and things living together. That's not it. Multiculturalism is about entrenching differences between different groups, I think, to the detriment of everybody, including, of course, people who've come into a country recently. So Sarkozy's comments are certainly, you know, potentially damaging to the debate about multiculturalism. They're also deeply cynical. I mean, he is a man who is, in all the polls now, running substantially behind his socialist rival, François Hollande. And obviously Sarkozy's strategy, he's decided, is to deal with his poll deficit by going after Marine Le Pen and her supporters on the far right of French politics. A tactic which I have to say is almost certainly going to fail.
Yes, this is the daughter of the former leader, or partly the founder of the National Front, who claims to be a more moderate version of her father, but I don't think there's sufficient vote there anyway. I mean, multiculturalism, I suppose ordinary people have triumphed over it over the years because most immigrants, whether it's the UK or Canada or anywhere else, have wanted to be part of the majority culture. That's what they aspire to. They've come to that country because of it. But
that's right.
Islam has changed quite a lot of that because now there's this very strong imperative that's saying to people from Muslim backgrounds, no, you don't have to change. So they will then, I suppose, be seduced by multiculturalism, and on two sides they're told, be whoever you want to be, which is often an Islamic radical. Here's the problem, surely.
Yes, I mean, I have to say the problems of European countries in dealing with this are almost impossible to exaggerate. On the one hand, you have very weak national identities that in many countries are sort of almost completely fearful of asserting themselves, terrified of saying, you know, this is an identity we would like you to consider integrating into. So you've got that at one end. Then you have, of course, as you mentioned, some immigrant groups, and Muslims are most obvious, who have elements within their midst who very much do not want to integrate and very much want to change and indeed take over the culture which we would wish they would be a part of. And then, of course, you have a spectre which is evident in France, perhaps more than most European countries, of a genuine threat from a far right. And in the midst of this, mainstream politicians are the absolute key, because only mainstream politicians like President Sarkozy could actually do something that allayed people's fears, and genuine fears, real fears of the electorate. Only people like Sarkozy could actually do things that allayed those fears, rather than just saying them. And the problem that Sarkozy has just demonstrated is that in recent years, since becoming president, he's done really very little that could possibly satisfy a French voter who was concerned about immigration into their country, mass immigration, loss of French identity and all that sort of thing. But then as it comes towards the election, does something which is hard to see as anything other than a dog whistle to the most base instincts on the right and the far right of French politics.
But it isn't enough to give him victory. I mean, you know better than I do, in French history, even French Protestants, Huguenots, were always thought to be slightly outside of French society. There's still a degree of anti-Semitism, or at least uncertainty about Jews in France. I mean, Sarkozy himself, some of his background, some Jewish background, some non-Gallic background, he's been partly a victim of that in the past. He won't be able to win the election with this one or two comments?
Well, I mean, I don't think he's likely to turn it around, although he is a very impressive politician. And I mean, you know, you should never write Sarkozy off. He's come back several times before from what people thought was political death. But the reality is that the polls look extremely bad for Sarkozy at the moment. I think the thing he'd have to demonstrate was that he wasn't just saying things, but was actually willing to do things in this regard. He said just earlier today that he'd like to try to remove France from the Schengen Agreement, which is the visa system that allows people to move freely across Europe. He'd remove France from it if better controls can be put in place. He's starting to say practical things, but quite frankly, 42 days before an election, to start saying this now is really a problem. And one other thing, which is that Sarkozy has said that there's a problem now he sees with integrating some groups into French society, and that it's failing in some cases. It can't be stressed enough, and I mean, it isn't just a Brit sort of gloating about French failings, I should stress, but I mean, it can't be stressed enough if you go to France that there really isn't integration in France. I mean, there isn't great integration in Britain either, but it's better than France. In France, as you know, in Paris, for instance, you know, the centre of Paris is almost entirely monocultural, and then you go out to the suburbs, the banlieue, and it's entirely monocultural in another way. And so to pretend that, as it were, all that needs doing in the French system is a little bit of tweaking or you know, change an agreement here, fiddle with something there, is to wildly miss the point.
Yeah, yes, and you're quite right. And sometimes North Americans aren't aware of this, that when they see a part of Paris which seems to be almost unchanged, but if you go to those suburbs, they're extremely ugly, yes. They're an afterthought, and there are areas there where the police simply do not go anymore, and it's beyond poverty and deprivation, it's also radicalism, Islamic radicalism, and well, France, interesting to see what will happen. I can't imagine the socialist government will be any tougher on this issue than Sarkozy has.
It will be a disaster.
I think it will be. I think it will be.
It will be a disaster. The socialist government, if it comes in, will be a disaster, not least for the French economy, because it'll tax every wage earner beyond tolerance.
Yes. We'll have you back after the election, but no gloating, but certainly analysis. As always, a great pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you, Michael.